Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. This is your host, Jeff Jones, and with me is the partial panel to start out. We have Kelly and Big Jeff. So, hey, guys, how you doing? Hey, Kelly.
Hello, good morning to everybody. It's good to be back. Yes, we're missing a few, but they will be joining us very shortly.
And Big Jeff, how you doing today?
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me back. I'm doing great and looking forward to dismantling the state's case episode by episode.
Now there's a chance. Maybe the truth will come out. Well, I want everybody to know I'm innocent. So that's all I'm asking for.
The state clearly was freaked out. Norm Gahn looks at it, and from that point on, you could tell that he was extremely worried. Afterwards, Norm said that this changes everything.
Okay, well, so why would you do that as the state? I'm sure they'll be able to read it when we do this live. What is the reason that the state is excluding that? As you know, you can say, oh well, this is a game, and in a game you have a prosecution and you have a defense, and the job of the job of both sides is to win at any cost that you can. But I have news for you, right? That is not the way that it's supposed to be. The prosecution at the end of the day works for the people, and those people include the accused and potentially wrongfully accused. It's not about securing convictions. It's about delivering justice. Why in the world, if you had something, and we know perhaps about the blood vial now, and I'm sure you have people who are watching have their opinions as to whether it matters or whether it doesn't matter. I think we all agree that without question, that one of the reasons that there's at least one hole in the top, maybe not, we don't know maybe why there's a large hole, but that they had to get the blood there in there in the first place. With that being said, there's something worth looking at here. What is the reason why you exclude or move to exclude this evidence? And it's because it hurts your case. That is not what the justice system is supposed to be about. The justice system is supposed to be about justice. And if exculpatory evidence comes up, you're supposed to allow that evidence and even potentially work with the defense to say, oh, you know what? This guy might actually be innocent. That's the way the justice system is supposed to work. It's clearly not working that way with our friend Ken Peretz.
The defense intends to bring this vial into court and show it to the jury to demonstrate that the vial was tampered with by officers. And when officers are accused of what they're being accused of, they deserve to have their reputations protected. They're good, solid, decent, family men. I'm sure everyone in this room knows them. We have to show the world that the blood that is in Teresa Halbach's car did not come from this vial of blood.
Mr. Beauty?
After 2 months, they have not been able to present the court with one single scientifically valid test that would somehow prove what they would love it to prove. There are no tests. Even the FBI stopped doing them because they're not reliable. The FBI is only doing this test now because the state is desperate.
Again, I just cannot emphasize too much. Give us the chance to meet this planting frame-up defense.
I believe it's fair to give him a chance to do so, and that's what I'm going to do. Mr. Fallon?
Yes, on one final point. If the defense wants to put forth the defense that they're suggesting and implying in their pleadings today, then they do so at their peril.
Well, there you go.
Maybe we can talk about what that means to you. So if I told you, Jeff, that you exclude me from the next panel at your peril, how would you take that?
It seems like you're trying to threaten me there, Jeff.
I would never say that. You can exclude me from the next panel if I'm bad, or for
Okay.
the reason you want. But I don't see any other way to take that. But as a threat, maybe there's some women's intuition that can steer us down a different road.
Kel?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I would be like, excuse me, what? What do you mean by that? You could take it as a more like a threatening, not a threatening, but like a challenging kind of method. Like, what do you mean by that? You can absolutely tell that this was, to me, is like the key for them. They're panicking. They panicked. They knew it was something that the jury could latch onto. If you could push that narrative enough, it's something that would definitely cause reasonable doubt. You've got a blood vial here, blood in the car. There's the whole case is about, well, how did his blood get into the RAV? And then they're now being able to present an alternative to that. That to them must have been absolutely petrifying, that it takes one juror to go, hang on a minute, something is off here. Let's play with this. Let's really look into it and kind of have those conversations to the jury about what the vial could mean. So I just think they were absolutely threatened by this vial. And then we see that upcoming, because they end up sending the swabs to the FBI, and they get involved, and apparently a test that's never been done before is managed to be conducted within weeks and a result. So you can see that this vial was being pushed to be eliminated as quickly as possible.
I find it to be quite interesting, because at the end of the day, they're defending it as if they really have firsthand knowledge that a cop didn't do it. But at the end of the day, they don't actually know that a cop didn't do it. They're just defending it. And and I think it's just telling. It's like they keep saying, well, we want a chance to defend, we want this. But this isn't really, and it didn't, in my mind, prove anything at the end of the day. Another one of those
certainly didn't.
Never did it before, never did it again. EDTA test. Never been used before, never been used again. Yet it was crucial in this case.
Yeah, I wish Dr. Silkman were here, because there are a lot of questions, especially that Zellner raises in MAM 2 regarding this test. And just because if you have a scientific test to search for something and it doesn't find it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was or wasn't there, right? There's always a probability of false alarm, probability of false detection are real things when you do scientific testing. And if the quantity of EDTA is below some level of particles per million, then it's not going to find it. And Dr. Silkman talked about in the last episode, just about how small of an amount of blood that there actually was in that sample that they found. And oh, by the way, it was the state who sent the sample down, right? And if it is, as Dr. Silkman said, that they potentially use swabs from, say, the Grand Am and sent those down, they switch the old swab switcheroo, then of course they're not going to find EDTA in there, whether that test is valid or not. So there's just so much fishiness that went on here that what can you really believe?
Sure, and they sell it as this is some official FBI test, but as you just said, it's not like the FBI came out and did their own collection.
And that makes all the difference, right? If the funny business happened in the lab, there's nothing to be done about it, right? And then one more thing, Jeff, that's worth an aside. At the beginning, we said that we'd point out when people from the 1985 case started showing up again. So in the 1985 case, as we know, Deb Strauss and Linda, and Amy Lehman went around and they did their pseudo investigation on what happened. they sent their reports of their interviews to a woman named Jennifer Nashold, who's now a judge in the Court of Appeals. And she presented an initial draft of the report. We're talking about what eventually became Peg's 1985 whitewash. And Jennifer sent her version of the report, which was heavily edited by anybody want to let us know?
I want to say Fallon, but that's just a guess.
Tom Fallon, you're exactly right, who just said you do this at your peril. So here we go, somebody from 1985, appointed, co-special prosecutor, just so happens to be the exact same person who did the real editing on the Avery report, and was basically, on a track to be accused for removing a large section that Jennifer Nashold had put in there regarding Dennis Vogel, who according to Mike Griesbach, knowingly prosecuted Stephen Avery, despite the fact he was sure that he was not guilty because of the existence of the Gregory Allen file in this case. So,
I mean, how can any judge allow Fallon to sit in on that case?
It seems like he has a conflict to me. I don't know.
A little conflict of interest, right?
Yeah, he's more attached to this case than Teresa's distant cousin, I can tell you that. So just in case it doesn't, the impact of those three charges that they just put up isn't clear to everybody. Right after Brendan's coerced confession, right before Brendan's coerced confession, Stephen had actually made the property bond, right? That the Averys had put up the property, and they had got enough money to be able to say, yeah, we can get Stephen out on this property bond. Brendan's false coerced confession happens, and what do? They add three charges to Stephen, and those three charges up the bond from $500,000 to $750,000. Guess what three charges they were? The exact three, you got it. The exact three that they're now going to be forced to drop because they're not going to call Brendan as a witness. So it stinks to high heaven. Yet another sort of nail in the coffin of the need for Brendan. Those charges now disappear. So essentially, when you think about it, he was held all that time. I mean, he's been in prison for over a year. He's arrested in 2005, and the trial's not starting until 2007, right? So it's just amazing.
About the additional charges.
Yeah, the ones that were dropped, when the state decided they weren't going to call Brendan as a witness, and those just happened to be the three charges that were added after his false confession, which are the ones that upped the property bond from $500,000 to $750,000. That would have allowed Stephen to get out. What a coincidence, right?
Yep. So they basically used it to their advantage and then dropped it, but the damage was done.
It is too late to sit on the fence. The state has all the information it needs today. It's had it for months to decide whether it's calling Mr. Dassy to prove the three charges it added or not.
The three attorneys at this table have had long discussions about whether we should proceed with all 6 counts or whether we should proceed with the 4 counts that don't require Brendan Dassy's testimony. If put to that question today, then it is our inclination to proceed on the 4 counts that do not require Brendan Dassy's testimony. But if we have to start this case swimming upstream, if you will, in the face of some instruction given to the jury that they should be taking some negative view of the state, then we intend to proceed on all 6 counts.
Mr. Strang, briefly.
All due respect to counsel, the state is supposed to start every criminal case swimming upstream. And the strong current against which the state is supposed to be swimming is a presumption of innocence. That presumption of innocence has been eroded, if not eliminated here, by the specter of Brendan Dassy. And here's why the court needs to take some further curative action.
The specter of Brendan Dassy was accentuated by the March 1st press conference, which was, basically a crime by Ken Kratz in and of itself called prosecutorial misconduct, giving those types of details out to poison the jury pool. So it is disgusting.
And just to back up what Big Jeff said, the damage has already been done. The horse has already been bolted, right? You can't unring that bell, so to speak. So in essence, Ken Kratz got away with a huge one by doing that press conference. And what's really maddening, in his book that we're analysing at the moment, he said, "Oh, my one regret was that March 1st press conference." Well, duh. Thanks very much, Mr. Kratz. And it's amazing, and Big Jeff called it, he never was sanctioned for prosecutorial misconduct. He had broken many, many laws, and it caused a lot of damage, that is for sure. And to make matters worse, the state never called up Brendan Dassy as a witness. Truly remarkable.
I think the part that I pick out from this is that his assumption of innocence, and Strang points that out so clearly. He's like, there is none. We have none. That's the stream. You should be going upstream. It's supposed to be difficult for the prosecution. You're the one that's making the charges. You're the one that's, and I think that it's just a small part, but it basically it demonstrates how Ken Kratz's law firm operates, right? It doesn't matter. It matters that he gets what he wants.
Yeah, the nature of the March 1st press conference, the nature of the ongoing assault on Stephen Avery in the press, really almost in a lot of ways shifted the burden of proof away from the prosecution, right? You had Len Kaczynski, Brendan Dassy's lawyer, going on TV and saying, basically, this happened, right? This happened. My client was a victim of the most evil person in human history. It was the press was ongoing against Avery, and so what does that leave? Everybody thinks he's guilty. What does that mean? Now the burden of proof is no longer on the prosecution. The burden of innocence is now on the defense in the mind of the jury. How is it possible that anybody in Manitowoc had not heard of this? So, Stephen is the one that opted to say, yeah, I think the people in Manitowoc will understand how corrupt the cops are, which is why he went for Manitowoc jury. I think that was a big mistake on his part because, they were all poisoned.
100% correct, Big Jeff. And it also goes to show Ken Kratz's attitude of win at all costs. And so quite clearly, his team was strategizing what was the best way in order to find both Brendan and Stephen guilty. And that's why, in essence, they went with 2 trials, right? The 2 separate trials. This was a very, very clever strategy by the state.
Up through the WFRV report last night, for example, Stephen Avery has been presented as the man who allegedly raped, mutilated, and murdered Teresa Halbach. How many times will Stephen Avery be charged in Manitowoc County with rapes he didn't commit? This makes 2.
I don't want to stop it at everything he says, but it's such a good point. And I've brought this up before, and this is my theory as to why I think the rape charge was so important for the revenge, if you will, because he got out of a rape charge, and that needs to go back on his record. That needs to be replaced.
But it really summarizes, in a way, the strategy that the state were going with, that Stephen Avery was a malevolent sexual predator, right? And people keep on forgetting, conveniently, that Stephen Avery was not charged for the brutal sexual attack on Penny Bernstein. And it's rather remarkable that the way that Ken Kratz puts it, it's almost as though he was charged with the sexual assault of Penny Bernstein. So he's giving this really bad impression of Stephen Avery, and it had a great effect as well.
You know, forget getting the 18 years back on the first one. Where do we go to get the last 10 months back? Where do we go to get our presumption of innocence back? From a public who believes and has heard time and again that he's an alleged rapist, even before murder.
I do not believe that the state has engaged in any conduct to this point which would warrant the giving of some type of instruction unfavorable to the state, should the state decide at this point to dismiss some of the charges that have been filed.
We've got 130 of these jury questionnaires. One person, only one, has said they think that he might actually be innocent.
Yeah, I'm willing to assume I'm innocent.
One. Versus the more typical answer of, is there any reason you you think he should not be selected to serve in this case? Yes. I already think he is guilty. Well, okay.
A trial is pointless.
Are you aware of the publicity? Yes. I read everything there was on the internet and in the newspaper on this case, including Dassy's interview confession with detectives. This case seems pretty much cut and dry. I believe the defendant is guilty as charged. Have you discussed this at length?
There's the American spirit.
You know, Jeff, Dean and Jerry take a lot of crap in the truther community. But the fact of the matter is that you just heard what they said, that they got these jury questionnaires, and only one of them indicated that that they felt that there's a possibility that Avery might be innocent. That person probably lied just so they could get on the jury. But think of what they've done since the conviction. Is they've agreed with Zellner, they've signed affidavits, or maybe that's not the right legal term for what they signed, but agreeing to ineffective assistance of counsel. When doing research, we know from some of the jurors that the initial polling of the jury, when they went back into the jury room, that the majority felt that he was actually innocent. Something changed during the course of the deliberations, but
delivery.
Yeah, the pizza delivery, right? After she's talking about Remaker, who is not supposed to have anything to do because he's like Manitowoc officer, but he brought pizza into the jury room.
It's always food with them. Didn't somebody bring sandwiches in to?
That was Lenk.
Yeah, there you go. They love the maneuver with the food. Everybody gets distracted by the donuts and pizza.
Right. But yeah, so Dean and Jerry, like you mentioned a second ago, Jeff, how powerful Dean Strang's statement was regarding that the state needs to start the case swimming upstream, and they managed to convince a highly unfavorable jury pool, at least through the initial meeting, that maybe there's a chance this guy didn't do it after all. So they did a reasonable job. There's things they could have done better for sure, but they didn't do that bad.
Yep, and that's a significant thing as well, because you could imagine how potentially the trial outcome could have come out hadn't Ken Kratz done that press conference, right? So despite all the negative things going for the defense, right, the first jury pool poll was 7 thought he was innocent. So one can only imagine what the end result could have been for both Stephen and Brendan hadn't that press conference been done by Kratz. Kratz knew what he was doing from the get-go. The way Ken Kratz works is of the philosophy, it's better to beg for forgiveness than ask permission, right? So he did the evil deed by doing that stupid press conference. He knew it caused a lot of damage to the defense and also to Stephen, and he has never apologized for it. Crazy.
It proves going through these jury rolls that Stephen made a huge mistake by staying in Manitowoc County. He doesn't get a lot of choices. This happened to Brendan, about the lawyer. You don't really get a lot of choices in this, and this is one choice that he made that, in my mind, those documents prove that you shouldn't have done this trial in Manitowoc. I don't know. Here's the alternative, though. Had it gone to Braun County in Green Bay, had it gone to Door County, had it gone to Fond du Lac County, Sheboygan County, had that made any difference? Maybe.
At this stage, I think they should have just sent it to Australia because honestly, I think that's the only chance he had.
I agree.
That there was, I think, no matter where it was going to go, someone had their fingers in the pie in every little area. It's insane.
Yeah, the big problem, of course, was that Stephen pointed an accusatory finger at law enforcement, right? And no matter where you go, I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. So in effect, no matter really what county that trial was in, it was always going to be a little bit difficult. I'm starting to wonder whether Stephen Avery had the option of going judge only. No jury, judge only. I wonder if that would have made any difference at all.
I think, Silkman, in you saying that, I think if this case ever moved forward and made it to another trial with Kathleen, I think that would have to be ultimately the only other outcome. I think with Making a Murder out there, even the state they would probably turn it and say there's too much biasm because how successful Making a Murderer was, and to find a jury to sit on the in now would be incredibly hard. That haven't been, one, aware of Making a Murderer and its success, or two, have watched it. So I think a judge-only trial would be the only way to go. And in Australia here, it's one of those in high-profile cases. It's huge. It's what we actually do. We have the Claremont serial killer who, for example, who just went on his trial last year. He ended up having to be done by a judge only because of the same circumstances. It's such a high-profile case. They knew that any jury who had been following it since his first crime in 1997, I believe it was, or 1996, it was already polluted with too much thought that the day that someone gets caught, they would have to have been guilty, because you wouldn't just arrest someone after all this time if you weren't sure. So yeah, I agree. I think as of right now, if this was to ever move forward, it would have to become a judge-only trial.
Yep, I agree. And the reason why I said that is because I've had a little bit of experience with the Nick Hillary, Garrett Phillips case, in which there's no doubt Nick Hillary was found not guilty for murdering Garrett Phillips, and it was done by judge only. It was very, very interesting that a lot of people had commented, had a jury been selected, they would have found him guilty because of the inherent bias. And so, in effect, you think that if Stephen is granted a new trial, probably the safest way to go will be judge only. Hear the facts, sort them out, and come to a conclusion.
This case seems pretty much cut and dry. I believe the defendant is guilty as charged. Have you discussed this at length?
There's the American spirit.
Right now, more than 15 months after Teresa Halbach was murdered.
The jury is picked and the trial of Stephen Avery is ready to begin on Monday. Thanks for joining us. One of the most high-profile murder trials in Wisconsin history is set to begin.
Teresa Halbach's family is seeking justice. It took all week to seat a jury.
These jurors range in age from 20 to 80. They include a carpenter, an international recording artist, a homemaker, a mechanic, some working, some retired, all Manitowoc County residents.
The jury will be bussed from Manitowoc to Chilton each day of the trial. It's expected to last 6 weeks.
Teresa Halbach had her whole life in front of her, and the evidence is going to show that on Halloween of 2005, that all ended. That ended in the hands of the defendant, Stephen Avery. Who is this man? Virtually all of you knew something about Stephen Avery before serving on this particular jury. Mr. Avery achieved some degree of notoriety back in 2003 when he was exonerated. And at the close of this case, I'm going to point to every one of you potential jurors and say that has absolutely nothing to do with this case. When deciding who's accountable,
I'm sure everyone's going to jump in, but can you see the way Ken Kratz worked? What he was trying to do was diffuse everything that had occurred to Stephen and his family in 1985. He wanted to trivialize it. He wanted to bury it. He wanted to make sure that no one would ever think in the back of their mind, jeepers, I wonder who had an absolute motive to profit from the death of Teresa Halbach. So he tried his very, very best to bury it. But I know that Strang and Buting brought it up at every inconvenient occasion for the state. Rather remarkable the way Ken Kratz was saying that Stephen had gained some notoriety. Well, that notoriety was because of, a frame up and a setting up by the likes of Kacerik and Vogel. So that notoriety was all due to nefarious activity. Shocking.
Now, there's one thing that I've heard mentioned before, and this information wasn't out at the time, but there was another Gregory Allen assault, right? That had, and maybe in Minnesota.
Yes, there was.
And so by this time, it was hidden. It wasn't out in the public realm. But had that been disclosed, it would have changed things. And I know I'm kind of jumping forward on that, but
no, you're correct. One of our researchers, Sunshine Christina, has spent a lot of time looking at Gregory Allen, and you're indeed correct. During the Stephen Avery trial, there was a further charge on Gregory Allen that was kept very, very quiet and out of the public attention. Because when you think about it, imagine if that information had been brought up during the trial and in a public manner. That meant that Gregory Allen was responsible for another sexual attack while Stephen Avery was sitting in prison, right, for a wrongful conviction. And it would have looked really, really bad for the state. So I think the belief is it was kept deliberately quiet, not to stir the waters. But you're correct, Jeff Jones. You're correct. That's a very interesting point.
for the death of 25-year-old Teresa Halbach, Mr. Avery's past and his past exoneration have nothing to do with this case. The state intends to prove to you that the defendant restrained, murdered and mutilated Teresa Halbach. Mutilation of this little girl, excuse me, not this little girl, this young woman, absolutely occurred because this is what's left. Small, tiny pieces of bone fragment.
Yes, restrained, murdered, and mutilated. So how many of those did they even attempt to prove, right? Stephen was exonerated for mutilation of a corpse. There's no evidence on the bed, no forensic evidence that Teresa Halbach was even in that room. So where is the evidence of restraint? So strike two, Ken. And go ahead, Tony.
And the stupid thing, of course, you know how Ken Kratz is going for the shock and awe by showing the cremains. Well, wouldn't it have been really great if he was able to say, oh, well, we called out the state coroner who did a thorough investigation, and she brought her own forensic anthropologist and thoroughly documented the burn pit and thoroughly documented the cremains. Of course, that never happened. So we are to believe that those the box of bones that you see there, did in actual fact come from that burn pit without any form of crime scene photography or documentation. Truly one of the most shocking crime scene investigations I've ever heard of.
Now, despite Mr. Avery's efforts to completely obliterate all of these bones by burning, to incinerate these bones completely, this bone survived. It's Teresa Halbach's shin bone. It's Karen Halbach's daughter's tibia. Remembering the humanity of Teresa Halbach, remembering who she is, what she meant to these people, is an important part of this process.
I don't think it is an important part of the process. I think an important part of the process is finding the evidence that proves the guilt, right? And I know that this is maybe done in prosecutions where they try to pull at the emotional heartstrings of the jury, but it just shows that he's trying to distract. He's trying to change. Don't think about the evidence. Think about how bad the Halbachs are suffering and how nice it would feel to lock up this horrible man, Stephen Avery.
Correct. It was a strategy. And if you have a look, he's actually showing more emotion than what the Halbach family is. It's truly remarkable. Like I've always said before, he took on the role of being Teresa Halbach's father, right? You can hear the quiver in his voice. He's becoming extremely emotional. And he wants to, this I see very much, I don't know what the other guys think on the panel. I see this very much as a Beauty and the Beast situation, whereby Stephen Avery is the evil monster. And he murdered this beautiful young woman who was pure, innocent. So he's playing that emotional card straight up front.
It's again, do what you have to do to win. With regard to that shin bone evidence, let's try and lay out what the state is having us believe, that there was this fire in an open pit that was hot enough to burn a human body down to cremains, right? So you saw what was left, hardly anything left, and but of all despite the fact that I was able to reduce bone to ash for the most part, there was this one little piece out of all the pieces that there could have been, one piece that happened to have one cell that didn't even give a full DNA profile, that miraculously survived. Yet another making a murder miracle right before our eyes.
Yeah, 100%. Another Pam of God moment. But it's truly remarkable that how, as Big Jeff alluded to, the fire must have been so hot that it converted a human being to tiny bone fragments, right? Around about 60% of the skeletal remains have never been accounted for. And yet, miraculously, you've got the surviving piece of charred muscle tissue, which just happened to be good enough to give a 7 out of 15 loci match. It's rather remarkable how you can have anything surviving in that fire pit. But the evidence goes, I think the evidence shows that Teresa Halbach was not cremated in that burn pit, but most likely in a burn barrel.
Which again obviates what Brendan said happened, right? I think that's the to me the most important part of that last thing. I'm willing to believe it happened in a barrel. You still need a lot of fuel. The amount of brush that Josh Verdant had cut, which is what the reason for that bonfire was the neighbor of the AB property had cut down some brush. Stephen agreed to burn it if Josh agreed to use his automated tools to cut down Stephen's brush. So that's what was burned that night, a bunch of brush. I just got done burning a bunch of brush. It burned for an hour, and I could barely toast marshmallows on it. So never mind reduce a person to ash. And that's what Brendan said happened. Saw the legs in the fire. He saw the forehead. He saw this. He saw that, all in the fire. He drew a picture. He didn't draw a dismembered picture, but he drew a full stick figure picture. So this is yet another piece of evidence that completely destroys Brendan's coerced confession.
Yep, 100% correct.
Ultimately, this process includes assigning accountability for the murder and the mutilation of an innocent 25-year-old young lady. I'll ask at the conclusion of this case that you return verdicts of guilty. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kratz.
They wouldn't look at nobody else. They're paying all their attention to me. And they shouldn't be doing that. That's what they did before.
In a long trial like this, openings are very important. Really, probably more important even than the closings. Because by the time they get to that point, it's going to be a matter of arguing for a few of them, probably. I think most of them will probably have already decided. So we want to get them early. Just get them thinking that there's another side to this they have not heard. All they've been hearing for 15 months is, Teresa Halbach is burned, bones were found on Stephen Avery's property, which is a horrible fact. But what they don't know is that there's evidence those bones were moved. And neither does the media. So it's going to be interesting to see the reaction when that little tidbit finally becomes public. The blood I'm a little bit more worried about than I was when I first discovered it, and was very happy, and because I don't trust the FBI at all. And I think that they're going to come up with some dishonest test that somehow claims that the blood in the vial is different than what was found at the scene. And that'll be a little bit harder to overcome. I'm not worried about the key at all. I like the key. I'm glad they're using it. It shows that if they would be willing to go to that length of planting a key, which I think the jury's going to get, then the blood follows easily. It does.
That's as close as you're probably going to get to hearing what these lawyers were kind of keyed in on it, and what they were planning on doing. The one part that I also picked out of there was that he did say he didn't trust the FBI, and that hurts. I mean, that hurts from both directions, especially in today's day and age where there's, mistrust in the FBI. And this is the kind of stuff that breeds more conspiracy theories, right? When there is distrust in the FBI, and when the FBI does kind of toe the line or help out a jurisdiction in a way or not. So I think he has a point there. But my overall point on this section is that this is really the strategic planning phase that we're witnessing. And he said, we have some evidence that shows these bones were planted that nobody knows about, the press doesn't even know about. Now, did they hit that hard enough? Did they hit that fact hard enough in retrospect?
In my opinion, no. In my opinion, no. It was a very long trial testimony of Dr. Eisenberg, and I think a lot of the points that Dean Strang got out of Eisenberg, I think they tended to have been a little bit lost. Strang asked some really, really good questions that really bamboozled Dr. Eisenberg. But I don't think all those points were hit home hard enough, because Kratz tried his very, very best to make sure that he didn't spend any time discussing the cremains at the Manitowoc County gravel pit, right? And of course, Cuss Road was a non-event. So you can see what the state were doing. The state were making sure that no hard questions were being asked, especially about the cremains. But, a lot of good points were raised, but I believe that they could have been summarized better so that the jury can understand that, hey, this is not a normal cremation event. Something really weird has gone on with these cremains that make no sense at all.
So I agree 100% with what Dr. Silkman just said. Another thing that you have to look at, Jeff, I think is, if we go back and ask ourselves in retrospect, if Dean and Jerry had the ability to hire, either other experts or additional experts that may have been in different fields, I think that might bode a lot better for Stephen. But when you think about how much money the state actually spent on the prosecution of this case, the number 25 million is coming to mind. Maybe you guys you got Tony. I know the foul play team. They've read up highly on that stuff. If you have a number, please throw it out. But
yeah, I think Jeff. The number was around $2.5 million.
Two and a half million.
It was certainly a lot of money, and
a lot more than Stephen had.
Oh, no question about that. And Big Jeff, you are so correct. I believe that had Stephen's defense team hired at least a blood spatter expert, I believe that would have been a game changer, and also a DNA expert on the panel. That really would have been very, very interesting, because you could throw out different type of scenarios which are very different to what the state had proposed. So hiring the appropriate experts could have been a game changer for Stephen. But the problem, as Big Jeff said, money. Who has the highest money usually wins.
And that was certainly the case in this case. And if you think about the money that Stephen Avery got in the settlement, he ended up getting $400,000. A third of that went to his other lawyers, right?
Correct.
And that left him with 2/3 of $400,000. Some of that had to go to Dean, some of that had to go to Jerry, and the rest they had to use to hire some of these experts. Dean and Jerry did not make a lot of money on this. I mean, it's one of these cases that you take because of you're hoping for the post-trial notoriety to catapult your career, in addition to be with your officer of the court responsibilities, and that everyone should have a good lawyer and a fair trial. But the amount of money was basically insurmountable. And if I could throw in the expert that I would have liked to see them hire, I would have liked to have seen them hire a cellular expert, one that could tell them a little bit about voicemail.
Yes.
And there's some questions that come up later on in the trial regarding the cellular stuff, and basically the representative that they had that the state brought was really kind of a clown and didn't really know what she was talking about either. So would have liked to have seen a real witness to dismantle that testimony as well.
Correct. And I think Kathleen Zellner made the point that the state had something like 14 experts, and Stephen had, I believe, 2. So that's a huge difference right there.
Becomes public. The blood I'm a little bit more worried about than I was when I first discovered it, and was very happy, and because I don't trust the FBI at all, and I think that they're going to come up with some dishonest test that somehow claims that the blood in the vial is different than what was found at the scene. And that'll be a little bit harder to overcome. I'm not worried about the key at all. I like the key. I'm glad we're using it. It shows that if they would be willing to go to that length of planting a key, which I think is the jury's going to get, then the blood follows easily. It does.
In 2004, Stephen Avery filed a lawsuit seeking some recompense for the hole in his life, the time he had spent as an innocent man for the crimes that Gregory Allen committed. In October 2005, James Lenk and another ranking officer of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, Sergeant Andrew Colburn, both were pulled into the lawsuit, questioned about their own activity and conduct with respect to Mr. Avery's imprisonment. It's Thursday evening, about 5 o'clock, November 3, when Mrs. Hallbach reports Teresa missing. That very night, Calumet is calling the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department for a little bit of help. And who do we get? We get Sergeant Andrew Colburn. And he's told, look, 2 places we'd like to sort of check out and see if Teresa Hallbach showed up on Monday. The Zipperer residence and Stephen Avery. Well, that's a name that rings a bell, you better believe. Less than 3 weeks, or about 3 weeks after his deposition. And it is interesting that of those 2 places that Sergeant Colburn is asked to check out and inquire after Hallbach, he only goes to 1. Goes to Stephen Avery's home. Out of the blue, the same night, Lieutenant James Lenk calls Calumet about this missing person report. Let's be clear, it's in another county. It's not even Manitowoc County at all. And nobody has called for Lieutenant Lenk. Nobody's called looking for him. But the chief detective of Manitowoc County takes it upon himself that night to call Calumet and offer to get involved in the missing person investigation, where one of the appointments that was to be kept was Stephen Avery. November 5, Saturday, Pam and Nicole Sturm find the Toyota they suspect, correctly as it turns out, is Teresa's. And folks, from that point forward, before the police say they've even opened the car, before they say they know of any blood of any sort in or on the car, before anybody even knows whether this young woman has been hurt or killed, the focus is on Stephen Avery. Hear it yourself. When Detective Jacobs is calling after the police have arrived at the Avery property after Teresa's car has been found there.
Good morning, Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Katie speaking.
Katie, just rolled into the parking lot. Can you tell me, do we have a body or anything yet?
I don't believe so.
We have Stephen Avery in custody, though?
I have no idea.
This is 30 minutes after they found the car. Indeed, they wouldn't find the first bone fragment for 3 days. Do we have Stephen Avery in custody, though? Now, if you're thinking, though, that the evidence will show you that Manitowoc County bowed out because of the conflict of interest after it turned the investigation over to Calumet County, if you're thinking that, it's reasonable, but you're wrong. Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department stays very much involved in this investigation. And police didn't kill Teresa Hallbach, obviously. They have that in common with Stephen Avery. But they wanted to believe he did. And whoever did kill her or burn that body exploited that tunnel vision pretty skillfully.
Did you see what he just said there? He actually said the police didn't kill Teresa Hallbuck. That he, just like Stephen Avery didn't. It's so funny that in the end, Ken uses that and twists it to give that as the only option to the jury. So he was playing on Dean's words here that ultimately challenged the jury at the end to say, you got to make a decision. You either have to believe that the cops killed her or Stephen Avery did. Crafty little fucker, isn't he?
Yep. And in a way, what he did, of course, was he spooked the jury by saying, "You're cops, you're cops." So, in other words, he gave them a straw man type of argument, where if you believe that it wasn't Stephen Avery that had killed Teresa Hallbuck, then it had to be the police that did everything, the murder and also the setting up. And of course, that's completely ludicrous, because even Dean Strang said, hey, the police took advantage of the fact, or the killer took advantage of the fact that there was going to be like tunnel vision. So, I honestly believe that this was a two-step process. You had the murder itself, and also you then had the setting up afterwards, right? And it would have been very, very easy and straightforward for law enforcement to set Stephen up, because they're the ones that are finding all the forensic evidence against him, right? They're gathering the forensic evidence against him. So it'll be relatively straightforward.
We don't know where the the antics of the killer ended and where the cover-up began. That's part of the difficulty in unwinding this.
Some have even suggested that they overlap, Big Jeff. They overlap.
Yes, they have.
In the end, after the full and fair consideration of everything and everyone, the full and fair consideration that Stephen Avery did not get from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, we're going to ask you to send him home. We're going to ask you to send him home again. We're going to ask you to get it right this time. We're going to ask you to set it right.
So Teresa takes a picture, you come outside, she and you are both outside, you give her the money, she goes and gets in her truck and then gives you a Auto Trader magazine. Is that right? Is she in the truck or out of the truck when she gives you the magazine? She's in the truck. She's in the truck. Okay. Then what happens next?
Then she goes in her boat, shut the door, I walk to her house, I put the book on my computer, came back out, and I was gonna walk over to Bobby, but then his vehicle was gone.
So you walk in the house, you put the magazine on, you come out, and Bobby's vehicle's gone.
Bobby's vehicle's gone.
So Dassy, do you know the defendant, Stephen Avery?
Yes, he's my uncle.
You have to speak up just a little bit, please.
Yes, he's my uncle.
And is he in the courtroom here at this time?
Yes, he is.
Would you point him out for the record, please? Tell the judge where he's seated.
He's right over there to my right.
Mr. Dassy, do you know where your uncle
Can
is?
I just ask a question here? Why do you think Mr. Kratz got Bobby Dassy to point directly to his uncle? Was that for effect or why? I mean, don't you think Bobby recognizes his own uncle? Why did he ask Bobby to point him out? It seems ridiculous. And the reason why I say that is because that's what happened in 1985, where Penny Bernson was asked to point out whether you see your attacker in the courtroom. And she, of course, pointed out to Stephen Avery. Isn't that rather remarkable that Ken Kratz asked Bobby Dassy, who's the nephew of Stephen Avery, to point him out in the courtroom?
To us.
Please tell the jury what we're looking at.
Well, basically, this is my mom's house. The red thing is Steven's trailer.
Bobby, on October 31st, 2005, do you remember anything unusual that happened at about 2:30 that afternoon?
A vehicle had driven up and started taking pictures of the van.
Let's back up just a minute. What did you see?
I seen a vehicle pull up in our driveway
And how do you know that it was about 2:30 in the afternoon?
because I was going hunting that night, and that's the time I wanted to get up.
All right. Tell the jury what you saw then.
I seen Teresa Holbuck get out of the vehicle and start taking pictures.
After seeing her taking any pictures, did you see her do anything?
She started, before I got in the shower, she actually started walking over to Steven's trailer.
When looking at exhibit number 61, could you point to the window that you looked out and watched things from?
That window there.
The leftmost window in the trailer,
Yes.
is that right? About what time do you think that you left to go hunting?
20 to 3, quarter to 3.
Quarter to 3? Mr. Dassy, when you walked out to your vehicle to go bow hunting, did you notice if Teresa's vehicle was still in the driveway?
Yes, it was.
It was?
Yeah.
Did you see Miss Hollott?
No.
See any signs of her at all?
Nope.
Talk about the seat shifters. These people, I keep seeing them, but they're shifting in their seat. They can't sit still. They got something's not right. And I see this happening. The people in the jury are moving in their seats when Bobby's talking. The jury asked, can we listen to that Bobby Dassy testimony back again? Because he was a seat shifter or something. He's something sketchy going on with that. And so I just open it up to you guys here. There's a lot to unpack with this timeline.
I think somebody else better go first.
Can we listen to Bobby's November 9th interview that was taken at the same time that the DNA samples were given for everybody? The same day Stephen Avery was arrested, and the same day they took samples from Earl and Chuck and Dolores and Barb. They also took them from Bobby, and they gave an interview, and everybody's interview is recorded. But Bobby Dassy's interview, it was recorded, but guess what? It is
Yep, sealed.
Sealed. Thank you. And why do you suppose that is? What one might speculate is because there is information that is incriminating to the state's case on it. What did they have on Bobby? Bobby, we know you're selling drugs. Whatever it is. They had leverage over Bobby, and they used it to get him to say whatever they wanted. Furthermore, with regard to the timeline, Jeff, which is what you asked your question about, maybe the timeline starts in the morning where we know because of the search on the computer in Bobby's room that he was actually surfing porn in the morning, not sleeping like he said he was. So we know Bobby lied. He lies over and over again, lies like a rug. He says that computer wasn't even in his room. Yet on the exit video that we have, that our friend Henberry FOIA'd, we see clearly in the computer in his room as they're doing the exit video for the 8-day police search of the property. So Bobby has a lot of lies that he has yet to answer for. So next.
I think you're fair. He does tell porkies, but I don't think it's fair that we just focus on Bobby. They all fucking lied. Blaine lied. Bobby lied. Fucking the law enforcement lied. Every single person has lied. And I think it comes down to save yourself. And I think that's potentially what is being not shown here. We have phone calls from Ma, Avery, and Barb telling Stephen the law enforcement are going fucking hard on Bobby. We have now got further phone calls that have now just been released that provides a sense that Bobby was a person of interest. So the cops weren't just treating him like a witness that is going to help them get Stephen. Somewhere in the very early beginning, they considered Bobby as a potential person that could have done this as well. So I think it's fair. For me, I think what's getting hidden, maybe it's a combination of a few things. When you read Bobby's very, very first interview, and he actually writes it himself and signs it in his own handwriting, he has himself getting up. Okay, the porn and all that is questionable. Again, we all agree he was obviously on the internet throughout the day looking at porn, rah, rah, rah. But he claims he got up at around 2 to 2:30. In his very first statement, he says, I got up, I had a shower. As I got out the shower, I was getting dressed. I saw the photographer rock up. I looked out the window. I watched her take a photo. I then continued to get ready, grabbed my jacket, walked out, got in my car and left. As I was leaving, I saw her walking towards the trailer. When you go back and compare it to Stephen's very first interview, he says, and I quote, I tried calling her at 2:24. There was no answer. I did do it on a blocked number, so she didn't feel obliged to call me back. As I hung up that phone call, I saw that she had arrived basically straight away. I was watching her through my window. As I was putting my shoes on, she was walking towards my trailer. So in fairness, I think that what they're trying to hide is the timeline. I think they made Bobby change the shower to after her arrival because they wanted to stretch the time longer, that she was there longer connected to that 2:41 phone call. They wanted that 2:41 phone call to always continue to stick against Stephen Avery because that's the time she disappears. They want her around that time to be still in his presence. So they're making Bobby stretch out that timeline to keep her as close as they can to being the last time she was ever seen or heard from ever again. Yes, he talks shit. They all talk shit. But in fairness, I think it became it's either you or him. And I'll be honest with you, I would have taken the me over him. He has watched or not watched because he wasn't born, but he's aware that his uncle was targeted before. He knows what the law enforcement can do. And if he didn't kill Teresa, why would he not be any different than anyone else and save your own skin when you know what could happen? So in fairness, there is nothing pointing in any forensic evidence to Bobby Dassy, just like there's nothing pointing to Brendan Dassy. To sit there and claim that he is potentially, for me, Bobby makes the best Denny because he has a cluster of circumstantial evidence against him. But the sad thing is, you can make that same cluster of circumstantial evidence against him, against a few other people, and they all share the same trait. They don't have forensic evidence against them.
Well, that's 100% correct. But what I can't understand is this, and I know I've discussed this a lot of times. Why would Bobby Dassy insert himself into the narrative? Why? What was his motivation for saying, yes, I did see Teresa, where he could have easily said, look, I didn't see anything. I was in the shower. And then I left to go bow hunting. Why did he insert himself into the narrative? What was his motivation?
That is a very good point. So there's a few people, you can go two ways with this. You can always say that a killer will insert themselves in fear that they have to get that 1 foot a step ahead. It's better to give them a little bit of a half a truth than for the cops to find out later that there is more to the story. Or you could just say that he was just, because he was telling the truth, Silkman, he had nothing to hide. So he was just honestly telling them what he saw that day. The other thing that I wanted to kind of touch base on Bobby is the fact that, he's Yeah, I don't know. The thing is, when they first went after Stephen, there was nothing stopping them from making this a Bobby and Stephen narrative either.
As a conspirator.
Yeah, exactly. If they could do it to Brendan, they could have done it to Bobby very, very early on as well. And you can see that they had him as a person of interest. So where were they going with that? I want to kind of know, in all the investigation, a few of us have been trying to go back and trying to see where was that turning point for Bobby. We can see that there's like this moment where they've got him on their radar, and then he drops off, and it's all about Stephen. What made them decide he was not that person, that he was not involved? I'm really interested to see where and how they eliminated him as such. Was it after the DNA was submitted? Was it before? Like, there's a turning point that we just can't quite see yet, which I think is quite interesting.
Well, that's correct. But I think the big turning point, of course, was the finding of the RAV4 and the fact that allegedly there was Stephen Avery's blood in the RAV4. And you're correct, Kelly. There's no forensic evidence that we know of that points to Bobby Dassy. But, if you're using the same strict standards, there's no forensic evidence pointing to Brendan Dassy either. It's just his words. And so I personally believe the reason why Bobby Dassy got involved in the narrative was because of what Stephen said, right? Stephen had observed Bobby leaving the premises to go bow hunting, right? So you could imagine that it would have been a very strong argument, even if it's circumstantial, that, okay, Teresa Hallbach goes missing, and you also go missing at around the same time period, right? And then if you factor in, if the defense was able to bring in that evidence of what was found on his computer and can actually pattern match the looking up of the torture pornography, etc., at a time when only Bobby Dassy was at home. When you factor all of that into account, that's pretty strong circumstantial evidence against Bobby Dassy, right? But as we know, and as we'll later find out, that all went deep six, okay? Fassbender held on to that, the DVD or the CDs with that information. And as you can see, what Bobby said hurt Stephen a lot. But, Kelly, the way you put it, the way you went through it, what Bobby Dassy actually saw is not mutually exclusive to what may have actually happened. In other words, both Bobby and Stephen were in their houses, in their trailers, and they had observed Teresa Hallbach come and take pictures, right? So quite clearly, it could have been that when Bobby had left to go bow hunting, he had noticed Teresa Hallbach walking towards the trailer. Well, that could have simply meant that as he had left, Stephen had come out, Teresa turned around and went back to her car, right, to get the book out, etc. So if you work it out, what Bobby, apart from the shower, and I agree about the shower, stretching out the time period, if you look at both testimonies, they're not exactly mutually exclusive. But what it will mean would be that Bobby Dassy actually left before Teresa Hallbach.
I got a question for the panel and for the live panel by the time this premieres.
Let's pop Denny in quick. He's going to drop in. So before you mention your... Hey, Denny, welcome back.
Hey, all. Sorry I'm late.
That's okay. So the question I have is something that a few of us have been talking behind the scenes about for the last few days. Don't you find it, what would you guys think do you think this could have changed things if it appears that Bobby and Stephen never really talked after the fact? Do you think that things would have been a lot different if these two gentlemen had just got together and said, hey, dude, or even even on a phone call and gone, hey, dude, what actually did you see that day? Like, I know that there was a slight discussion on the 4th when there's this alleged hide the body, but it doesn't appear that either of them ever went, hey, did you see Teresa that day? Well, what time did you go? Like, there was no discussion between these two, the two people that should have spoke the most, because they could have set a foundation and went and worked out a timeline and really spoke about what each other saw that day. Do you guys think if they would have done that and they would have established exactly what they seen and been on the same level, like Bobby could have went, man, I had a shower, but when I got out, I saw her rock up, and then Stephen would have been like, oh, that must have been when I just hung up the phone. And then he could have been like, oh, but as I grabbed my jacket and I walked out, I saw her walking towards you. And then Stephen would be like, oh, that must have been when you left because I was putting on my shoes. So by the time I come out, you must have been already heading towards, the Avery salvage driveway per se. Do you think that could have changed this if them two had just spoken? The two people that had their timelines essentially used against each other.
Maybe. It's an interesting thought. I mean, it's when you think about it, it's actually it's actually kind of miraculous that they ran across each other in the first place, because the Karen Hallback doesn't call in till the 3rd. Which is a Wednesday, right? So all you've got is Thursday and Friday, and half the family's headed, or more than half the family's headed to Crivets. Bobby didn't go, so it's actually a very small window of opportunity for that to happen. And Bobby works a night shift, so but that really doesn't get to the point of your question. I think the answer is maybe. It kind of speaks to innocent people not wanting to, really ferret out what really happened. In Stephen's mind, she was there and gone. I don't think anybody on the property necessarily thought that Stephen was guilty in the first place. So why would you, right? I mean, she was gone. She left, and not until Stephen is arrested on the 9th do we do we start to think about things like that in retrospect. But maybe if they had done it, they might have been able to sort of figure something out regarding what happened.
It's just that I see there's a lot of phone calls happening between Stephen and there's Barb and then there's Ma. Like it doesn't even appear that Stephen's Ma Avery or Barb are like talking to Bobby and going, oh, what, like when everything's starting to come out, like what exactly did you see? Like there's just seems like there's no conversations, and you would expect the conversations to start because like you said, he then gets arrested. What's a phone call? Like, Bobby, talk to bloody Stephen for God's sake and find out what exactly happened that day. There's nothing. I just find that really weird that the two people, and right up before you go to trial, like I know that Bobby says in his 2017 interview with Deidring again, and I want to quote it. He goes, they ask, why do you think Kathleen's coming after you hard? And he goes, I really don't know. I'm wondering if it's because I testified against Stephen. He goes, but what you don't understand is I got subpoenaed to do that. I had no choice. I had no choice but to do that. So I just always wondered if there was just, where was these conversations as the case was developing, and that the main people that could alibi each other essentially as well were not communicating.
Well, when was the first time Bobby had mentioned seeing Teresa to anyone? When was the first time?
It was on the 5th, but it was already established from Jody and from Stephen on calls that Bobby was the last one to see her.
Right.
And then Brian also says he brings him into it as well. But they speak to Brian before even Bobby, and he says you might want to speak to Bobby because
that's correct.
Bobby said he saw her leave. So then they go to Bobby next and said, hey, and that's some of their lining of questioning for Bobby was, your brother said that you saw her leave. And he allegedly says, no, I never said that. That was not what was said at all. So essentially, in terms of investigation wise, the law enforcement didn't rule that out, but they had gone there. They had gone and questioned him about it. Where else could they go? If Bobby's saying he didn't say that, there was nowhere else they could take that. It was over for them in terms of that. They had followed it up. He denied it. There was nowhere else they could go with that. It depends on whether they believed it or not. Maybe they didn't. Maybe that's where he became a person of interest.
Right, because it is interesting because when Chuck and Brendan went to Crivets and Chuck reported seeing lights near his place, he allegedly phoned up Stephen, and apparently him and both Bobby went to check out the lights, right? And
that's correct.
It's obviously quite clear that the two never spoke about what they had seen, right, on October the 31st, because the two stories, the way they appear, are in total opposition to what actually took place, right? Bobby Dassy is saying, hey, look, when I left, I didn't see Teresa, but I saw her RAV4, right? Stephen is saying, no. After she gave me the magazine and I went inside and I put it near my computer, I saw Teresa do a left-hand turn on 147. So if you think about it, can the two stories be compatible? In other words, could it possibly have been that when Bobby saw Teresa walking towards the trailer, Stephen could have been coming out, right? And then Teresa simply could have walked back in her car and, given the magazine. But there's one problem, Kelly. Under no circumstances does Bobby ever mention an interaction between Stephen and Teresa. To me, that's a real worry. He never says that he saw both of them together. And yet, that must have happened because Teresa gave him an Auto Trader magazine.
But when you follow Bobby's story, he's essentially trying to fill in his gap. I think he's trying to say is where he was walking out the moment he saw her walk towards the trailer. And Stephen's first account was he was still putting shoes on inside and then walked out. It's that little window, what would you call it, that sliding door moment where that's where Bobby exited. And by the time Stephen walked out, Bobby had already left. The thing is, this was just a normal day for Stephen. This was, unless Bobby killed her, this wasn't a normal day for him. But essentially it started off as a normal day. The thing that I always go back to, and I think people don't get what I'm trying to say here, is I'm not saying he didn't go after her. There is definitely a possibility he did go after her. My point of it is there is also a chance that he left just before her. It's that sliding door moment. It's a normal day for the pair of them. They weren't paying attention to their own surroundings. They weren't realizing that that moment in time is going to be such a significant part of their life for the rest of their life. So when Stephen doesn't see Bobby leaving, that is just the same as Bobby saying that he didn't see that interaction. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that their sliding doors didn't match at that moment. They weren't paying attention to their surroundings. It could have happened. On the flip side to that, for Kathleen's own narrative, even if Bobby left first, the irony is it still doesn't take away that Bobby could have hurt Teresa or killed Teresa, because he could have been waiting in front of her at the end of the road and then from there flagged her down at the end and gone, oh, help me, I've just broken a tire or whatever, for whatever reason. For me, I personally, if I was Kathleen, would have liked it where she played that narrative better than him chasing her, because when you watch that reenactment, which we will get to when we get into Ma'am 2, a lot of us kind of chuckle at it that, you've got this guy that's apparently fiending off watching porn and is frantically chasing her down for 5 minutes on the road, and he's maintaining this manic, I'm going to get you, I'm going to rape you, I'm going to cut you up, whatever. Just just chasing her, when if Kathleen was like, okay, we'll let Bobby have that he left before her because he was waiting at the end of the road. If that's the case, you've just cut out 5 minutes of the chase because he's already there waiting. The game's already began. So I'm not saying that it's either way eliminates him from being a part of this. I'm just saying that both their stories could be true, because the sliding door moment, we don't know what that moment was. They weren't conscious enough to realize that that moment was going to have to be so remembered to the point that they both got it right or wrong. That's where I'm going with that.
Yep, correct. So the question is, the way the state used his testimony was to imply nefarious activity. And that is, Teresa's not there, her car's still there. The implication is that Stephen Avery has got Teresa Halbach in his trailer. That's the impression, I believe, that Ken Kratz was trying to give the judge and the jury. Hey, her vehicle's there, but there's no sign of Teresa Halbach. And you're correct. By the mere fact that he then took a shower, lengthened that time period to minutes, right? So what's Teresa Halbach? Where is she, right? Where is she? There's no evidence of her. Yet what is interesting was that Bobby Dassy was asked, did you hear any screaming? Anyone calling for help? He said, I didn't hear anything. So, you've got all these things that do not make sense and do not add up. But I believe that Bobby Dassy was manipulated by Kratz into testifying against his uncle. And it was very damaging, in my opinion.
That's how I read it. I mean, I feel like, I don't know if it was the detective or if it was Kratz, but they probably said to Bobby, do you want to go with your first story that you were the last person to see her, or did Steven see her last? And he says, Steven saw her last. And they said, we thought you were a smart guy. I mean, it's really not that much prying to get him to say that. Otherwise, who knows what can happen? This is Manitowoc County. You might be the last person to see her, and we might be looking at you.
That's right. It could have simply been, Bobby, you got to make a choice. It's either you or him. And that's it. You tell us what we need to hear. And he did. Right. And it's really interesting because I think later on in this series, Mama Avery goes, I thought Bobby liked Stephen. And that wasn't even the truth. And so hence you've now got this tension within the family whereby you have a nephew testifying against his own uncle. That's pretty bad.
Bobby, on the 3rd of November, the Thursday, I believe it is, do you recall having a conversation with your uncle, Stephen, regarding a body?
Yes.
Can you tell us what your uncle Stephen told you that day?
Well, my buddy Mike was over too, and he asked us, it sounded like he was joking, honestly, but he asked us if he wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
His sensational testimony today prompted a very dramatic response.
Can we just address this bit? A lot of people think straight up that this was a bullshit story from Mike and Bobby, the whole Mike adding into it. I just want to say that on record, Stephen has confirmed that this conversation did happen. He has an affidavit where he claims, yes, there was a conversation. Yes, Mike was there. The only difference is the whole structure of what was said and who said it first is just different. So Bobby was claiming that him and Mike were out in the garage. They were working on the deer. Stephen comes out and says to them, can you help me get rid of a body? Stephen, in his affidavit, says, yes, that, and they all agree it was a joke. But Stephen claims that he came out and Bobby or Mike, my apology, this is one I can't remember, one of them made a passing joke to him saying, you don't have a body under your bed, do you? Or something on those lines. That is paraphrasing. I have to reread it, but I just remember pulling it up the other day to provide this proof that it is in an affidavit form of Stephen confirming a conversation of this nature did in fact happen. So I wanted to highlight that because still there's a lot of misinformation out there where people are like, oh, bullshit, this is a made-up lie, this never even happened at all. Stephen himself has confirmed this, and I'm saying joke, regardless of which version of it you believe, did in fact happen. There was an interaction of this kind of, thing.
Yeah, but I think I 100% have heard and agree that the same thing, but the words matter, right? Because the way that the words came out just then were pretty damning against Stephen, right? The way that the words do matter. Interestingly, Mike Osmondson denied being on that property for 2 weeks around the murder of Teresa Halbach.
See, I don't know whether he denied it or he just, again, like everyone else, just didn't have the right dates. Everyone had their dates wrong. I think he had the right day, but just the wrong date, like a week or two later after the fact. He wasn't sure which date he was actually on the property. Was that intentional, or was that just like everyone else in this case just don't have their days in a line? They just think Thursday and have said, oh, if it was a Thursday, it must have been the such and such. I don't know. I don't think it's fair that we just keep saying that everything's nefarious, because look how many dates and times are wrong in this case. Not everything is nefarious.
No, that's true. Not everything is nefarious, but we know he was there on Friday, because his truck is in the flyover video, and Bob Dassy's driveway.
Yeah, and even Bobby says in his very first interview, or one of his very first interviews where this comes up, because he also adds this into one of his statements, that my mate Mike was there. He actually inserts Mike into it almost immediately himself. And Barb also inserts herself. She claims she was there also in the garage, and Stephen on a phone call, and there is a part of his affidavit that confirms Barb was there, but she wasn't a part of actually the initial conversation, but she was there. And Barb has said numerous times, I heard it, I just didn't participate, and confirm that the parties were there, but I don't think she ever really goes into who said what. She just confirms that there was a joke being made amongst them. And you hear in a minute, as this continues, Bobby says it was a joke. Like, for someone who's allegedly has just pulled off the greatest frame of his uncle, going by Bobby did it theory, why would you give him that string to grab onto? You would be pushing like this, my uncle's this person, this is what he was saying, but he backs it with it was a joke. But we'll see as that kind of goes on.
Again, the words matter, and I think interestingly, they did not call Mike Osmondson to the stand. And if the case really is that it was Mike who initiated the, what do you have a body under your car, or whatever you said, then all of a sudden we're talking about hearsay now, right? And you don't get the dramatic moment of the nephew pointing to the uncle, so the news media can say, "Look at that dramatic testimony that happened today," or shocking, or bombshell, or whatever they say. If Mike actually said it, we're actually talking about something you can't even admit in court in the United States, which is hearsay.
Correct, because I think I agree, Big Jeff. It was the words that were said that had the greatest impact, right? Because we're talking about the fact that you have a look at what Bobby Dassy said, right? His testimony that when he went to go bow hunting, he didn't see Teresa Halbach, but saw her vehicle, right? Giving the implication that Teresa Halbach was inside Stephen Avery's trailer. And then within a few minutes later, you've got Stephen Avery or Mike Osmondson talking about getting rid of a body, right? And, these are all very important words, right? And my understanding was that Mike Osmondson had stated that this event took place on November the 10th. That conversation took place on November the 10th. which then Dean Strang goes, how on earth can that possibly happen? Because Stephen had already been arrested on November the 9th. And I agree with Kelly. I think here what we've got is people getting their chronology incorrect. And this occurs quite commonly, actually. People getting wrong times, wrong dates. Hell, even Ryan Hilligus can't remember what time he saw Teresa Halbach, right? That Sunday. So he couldn't remember whether it was day or night.
He wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
His sensational testimony today prompted a very dramatic response from the defense.
Defense attorney Dean Strang said that
I mean, as Elizabeth said, Bobby Dassy's testimony and the mistrial issue took up quite a bit of time in this case.
We have no written summary of an interview of Bobby Dassy in which that statement is recited. We do have a report of a contact with a Michael Osmondson. Michael indicated he was aware Stephen was one of the last people to see the missing girl and jokingly asked Stephen if Stephen had her, the missing girl, in a closet. At this point, Stephen asked Michael if Michael wanted to, quote, help bury the body, close quote, and they laughed about this together. This conversation clearly is placed on Thursday, November 10. I now have a different witness to whom this statement has never been attributed, identifying the statement as having been made on November 3. The implication is that this may have been before Teresa Halbach even is reported missing. What I'm left with is this jury, having heard testimony from the first blood relative of Mr. Avery to testify here, his nephew and next door neighbor, that amounts to a confession of a crime. There is no way to unwind this from the jury's mind. It has enormous unfair prejudicial impact. If there were a remedy short of a mistrial, I don't know that there is, it would be something like the court instructing the jury that it may disregard as false all of Bobby Dassy's testimony because of his false testimony on this point.
Probably ready. Are you ready?
I'm always ready. Go ahead.
You said when you asked the question of Bobby that the conversation was on November 3rd, but later you said in reference to the police report on Mike Osmondson that he said the conversation was November 10th.
Was there a question there?
Where did you get the date November 3rd?
I can't clarify that. The testimony from Bobby Dassy today, that's the in-court evidence. He identified that conversation as happening on the 3rd.
No, you identified. You said on November 3rd, I believe it was a Thursday. Do you recall a conversation with Stephen Avery about a body?
All right.
So you established it as November 3rd, and I'm wondering where did that come from, a report we don't know about?
It came from preparation of Bobby Dassy. I talked to my witnesses before I called them.
The police reports, were they strictly from this Mike's statements to police, or did Bobby Dassy actually tell? Because it sounded like in court that Bobby Dassy never mentioned this conversation or these jokes with investigators, that it was only Mike that mentioned.
I understand that you're all very excited about this one piece. Please don't forget the real reason that Bobby testified today, establishing the timeline and establishing that Teresa Halbach walked towards Mr. Avery's house before she was murdered.
Why didn't you put Mike on the witness list and call him instead of so that you could have avoided this entire issue?
I didn't think this was an issue. I get to call my witnesses that I think is going to prove the state's case. Bobby Dassy was a central figure in this trial to establish, again, the timeline and to establish the last person to see her. This was not and is not, at least from the state's perspective, a central part of this case at all.
This was a strategic thing that they did. He wanted to get Bobby up there to slip it in, fuck with the jury's head, and basically mic drop and tap out without having to do the in-betweens and get to the nitty-gritty. That's how I just heard what Ken said.
Well, it's to establish a timeline Okay, so that's critical. So think about it. The state is saying that Teresa Horbach never left the Avery salvage yard, and nor did her RAV4. So now you've got his nephew saying, yep, I saw Teresa Horbach walking towards his trailer. So to me, they're very damaging words, Kelly. And whether it was intentional or not, Ken Kratz is under no illusions. Ken Kratz is basically stating that it had to have been Bobby Dassy who was the last civilian to have seen Teresa Horbach alive, right? So these are very, very powerful words used against Stephen Avery.
Yeah, so basically what I just saw is Kratz going, oops, that's not what I tried to say. That's not what I said. I said this. When in reality, the jury is not watching this press conference, right? The jury is listening to what was said in the courtroom. And I'm not even sure if they got to listen to what Dean Strang just said. I don't recall whether or not the jury was removed before that argument was made to strike. So yeah, so again, that's Kratz with a big fat porky, right? Is that what we call it, Kelly? A porky. I didn't say that. That's not what I tried to say. Yes, it is.
A lot of seat shifting in that press room. Did you see that? A lot of people shifting in their seats. You can tell something stinks when people start moving in their chairs like that.
This was not and is not, at least from the state's perspective, a central part of this case at all.
This will be very short, but if you have questions, we'll take 2 or 3 minutes.
What the hell happened?
That's right. Cutting right to us.
I'm dead.
Give me a little direction on.
Does this rise to the level of prosecutorial misconduct?
I'm not going to comment on anybody. I'm not here to throw stones.
The reference to the joke, it wasn't Dassy who told police about the joke. It was the third party who told police about the joke.
That's right.
So Dassy never actually told the detective, this is what I heard. He didn't say what he said in court today.
So far as the written reports we have, you are exactly correct.
How can Ken even ask that question then? How can Ken ask that?
That's horrible to look at. Stuff isn't even the truth.
That hurts. Big Jeff, you're the one with the talking voice. Do you want to read that?
Judge Willis denies the defense motion for a mistrial. The judge does not instruct the jury about Bobby's testimony. Like, for example, the fact that it was hearsay, like I just said before, and the fact that, if Ken said it came out during his interrogation of the witness, well, he's still obligated to give some level of discovery to the defense, right? So, okay, where's my discovery? Well, you don't get it this time.
That's horrible to look at. That stuff isn't even the truth. You don't feel too good when he says stuff like that. We always thought he liked Stephen, but it doesn't sound like it.
We're really worried that the jury might think, God, can we really acquit this man when we don't know, when we can't tell them who we think did it? That's going to be, on a human level, the hardest thing, I think. And the judge has really tied our hands on that.
This is an issue of fundamental fairness. And that issue is that the state does not have to meet as many prongs for arresting someone as that person has to meet for naming someone else as a suspect, right? And just to maybe clarify, what that the state really arrested Stephen Avery without him having a motive to commit that crime. Well, it's great that it's him. That massive lawsuit went away and all that potential exposure went away. Stephen wants to name somebody like Bobby as a possible Denny suspect, but he doesn't meet all the prongs of Denny. He met as many as Stephen did. His blood wasn't in the RAV, but he certainly had he certainly had those searches. For me, put me on team reasonable doubt, right? So that's what I think that the defense is entitled to be able to sort of put forward at the trial as much as possible, that there is reasonable doubt that the defendant actually committed this crime, because there are alternatives, and you just can't, you just don't know how, you're asking somebody like when you appeal the fact that you didn't get a Denny, but they have to say, well, would it have made a difference if you were allowed to name this person? And then you get arguments, well, he doesn't meet the prong of Denny. This is about fundamental fairness, and that's what Stephen was denied. And so, that's why I don't care. People say, even if you don't think Bobby did it, spend half your day researching that he did, because if you find something that makes him a more viable Denny, Stephen gets a new trial. The state screwed Stephen over so bad. I don't give a shit how he gets a new trial. I just think he deserves one. And that's kind of where I'm at with this affair. Over.
I think that was a savage blow for the defense. The mere fact that they couldn't point at any other potential suspect, because Bobby Dassy may have done nothing nefarious. However, he would have made an absolutely perfect Denny suspect, right? When you think about it, how coincidental is this, right? Both Bobby Dassy and Stephen Avery are both watching Teresa Hallbach car drive up their driveway, and both see her get out of the car and start taking pictures at the same time, right? Yet the state believes in what Bobby Dassy said. The state does not believe what Stephen Avery said. And Stephen Avery said, hey, she left the property, right? And you can clearly see that Bobby Dassy never saw Teresa Hallbach leave the property. So this is where the case does a 180. Who do you believe? Stephen or Brent or Bobby? And can you actually believe both of them? Kelly.
I agree with Big Jeff. I completely understand where he goes with that. It's that fundamental rights that you have. Unfortunately, the forensic evidence takes away the bar of Denny, in my opinion. You're not going to have a judge who won't, to consider a Denny in this case would have had to have been, okay, it would still be a Denny to a degree of a co-conspirator versus someone that planted blood against Stephen Avery. That's the bar we have here. And on top of that, I just look at it like this. We always go back, it gets brought back a lot about if the porn was able to be used against Bobby in the trial. I think they would have kept objecting that to foundation. That would never have been, in my opinion, been able to really come in, because it was before the murder, and Ken Kratz would be like, objection, foundation, where are you going with this? You can't point to him as a Denny. So what is him doing prior to what is happening mean anything? He's claiming what he was doing. His testimony is about what he saw when she arrives, and he was not actively looking at a computer searches at that stage. There had been a 40-minute gap that the last computer search had been done, or so forth. So as much as I agree the computer searches now create a great circumstantial Denny for Bobby, it's still the foundation. You can't use it against him in that 2006 trial, because at the end of the day, he was not allowed to be pointed as a Denny suspect. So they would have kept grounding that on foundation. Where are you going with this? You can't keep bringing up and trying to discredit him when he is not allowed to be pointed as a Denny. So I don't see how they really would have lifted off that porn searching at all in the trial. Honestly, they would have just kept going back and using Denny as their excuse to stop that line of questioning. And then it goes back to this, what I just echoed on myself. You know, you've got Bobby Dassy, potentially great Denny, versus Stephen Avery, who also meets all the prongs and is the only one with DNA against him, planted or not.
What was Stephen's motive? What was Stephen's motive? If he meets all the prongs, what was his motive?
The thing is, the state doesn't have to give a motive. The whole point
You
of
said he met all the prongs. Is that correct?
But the thing is, for the state, they have to provide prongs to a degree, but they have to also provide, they don't have to prove exactly how it happened. They have to come up with something, and you hear it in every case. Every case you'll hear, the state doesn't have to give a motive. They don't have to give why. They just have to present to the jury a narrative that would fit the evidence so that the jury can understand how this could have happened. It's up to the defense to argue that and provide proof of innocence that that's not how that happened. But unfortunately, there was so much evidence planted against Stephen. You could take away a few of the items and you still have damning ones left. The blood to me is the biggest damning one, because you cannot get past this. If you don't believe Stephen Avery bled in that RAV, the only other conclusion to that was it was planted. That is it.
Yes.
That's it. That's it. Oh, yes, that's your A and your B, your black and your white. If you do not believe Stephen Avery committed this crime, then you have to believe that the blood was planted. So the jury would then be left with two windows of opportunity to go down. Was it law enforcement that planted it, or was it the killer? Now that in itself spirals into its own problems. Like, you can just go boom. But that's what I'm trying to say. In this case, that is what the jurors were basically put down to. Either Stephen bled in that RAV, or Ken was saying basically, or you have to believe that they killed her and they planted the blood as well. Where Jerry and Dean were basically saying, no, they didn't kill her. Someone else possibly killed her, but the law enforcement planted all that shit. And clearly the jury didn't get there. They didn't cross that line. It either something spooked them, whether there was corruption, whether it was whatever was the turning point. At the end of the day, he was found guilty. So it didn't work. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think the choices that were presented to the jury were just rubbish. You know, it's either, like you said, Kelly, it's either the cops or somebody else, right? So that choice was very unpalatable for the jury because they didn't want to go there. The mere fact that they're suspecting that the police may have planted the forensic evidence, you also have to take into consideration, maybe the police killed Teresa Hobart, right? So they can't divorce this horrible event as being two separate events. The killing of Teresa Hobart and the setting up of Stephen Avery. Ken Kratz didn't want to give that possibility. Kratz wanted to say, hey, you have to believe that the cops killed Teresa Hobart and the cops planted the forensic evidence against Stephen. And you're also correct, Kelly. The state doesn't have to prove a motive.
My only takeaway there is that, if you look at the slide here, it says, if you can't offer any alternative suspects except Brendan, if you want to throw Brendan under the bus, there you go. You can have at it. Now imagine Dean and Jerry going like that's the alternative that they're saying. Like it's amazingly inappropriate. It's amazingly preposterous. So what they're saying is, yeah, if you think that kid, come on.
But you see the madness, right?
Yeah. Brendan wasn't even home, right?
Yeah, you see the entire madness of what the state are trying to do here. They're trying to say, okay, you can name Brendan, but why would the defense name Brendan if they believe that Stephen Avery was completely innocent and didn't commit this crime, what would they be naming Brendan for? Right? Brendan didn't do anything. Stephen didn't do anything. So they're now offering something which makes no sense at all. They're saying the only Denny you can name is Brendan. Yeah, but we're the defense team. We're saying that this murder never took place at the salvage yard. Why we're trying to bring in someone like Brendan, which is interesting because the state had the foresight to think, jeepers, if we put Brendan on the stand, the defense are going to rip him to pieces, right? So hence, it's ridiculous.
What timeline? What is any possible timeline that puts that you could put against Brendan? By the time he showed up, she's already gone, right?
Correct.
Correct. It's like what was the guy's name? Evans. Yeah, he accidentally hit her as he was walking in from getting off the bus. I don't understand what possible timeline you can have that makes but anyway, it's ludicrous on its face.
And this is why the defense team erred, because they actually believed the bus driver, right? They actually believed the bus driver, so they were trying to use the bus driver to say, "Hey, come on, she was still alive at 3:45, right?" Not realizing that Fassbender and Wiegert told Brendan, "We don't believe your timeline because the timeline isn't adding up, bud." So Brendan was happy to say, "Yeah, when I got off the bus, I saw Stephen, Teresa, and also the RAV4." But then that doesn't make any sense because Bobby just said when he left to go bow hunting, he never saw Teresa. So all of a sudden, Teresa 1 hour later is having a powwow with Stephen on his porch. Nah. So quite clearly, Brendan had no idea what had transpired. It's silly.
We can't point the finger at other suspects. All we're going to be able to argue is failure to follow this lead and that lead, which in a way points at other suspects. But there's a lot of leads that if they had been followed up might have led to motive, opportunity, and access and a direct connection to the crime. But in a case like this where there's such tunnel vision, you can't go too far down that road because they didn't go very far down the road.
When you read their Denny motion that they did try to submit to get it in, I think they named 8. There was 8 Denny suspects
I believe you're
they
correct.
had also came up with. So they had named 8 that they were favorable for, but again, the judge came back and said he did not feel that they all met the 3 prongs in his reply.
Right. So in my mind, Jerry's comment right there brings us all the way back to the beginning. And what we know is, the events that started with actually started before, but really, the big bang for Ken Kratz was the March 1st press conference, where where through prosecutorial misconduct, he began his poisoning of the jury pool, essentially switched the burden of proof to be in the jury's mind, because as we saw in the very, very beginning, only one juror said there's a possibility that he's innocent. He switched the burden of proof from the prosecution to say he's guilty to the defense to prove that he's innocent, right? So he's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but you hear Jerry worried about now proving that he's innocent, right? And that's not the way that's supposed to be. And it was all because of this stage dance that Ken Kratz did by feeding the media, et cetera, and the constant negative press against Stephen really put him in this position. And that's not the way the justice system is supposed to be. So that's my feeling about what Jerry just said. He was absolutely right.
Correct. It was a strategic plan from Ken Kratz right from the beginning, because remember, at that stage, the depositions were going on, and there was a degree of sympathy for Stephen Avery in the community about what happened to him. So Ken Kratz had to act very, very quickly in order to turn the tides of sentiment against him. And that's exactly what he did. So everything that Ken Kratz did was strategic and on purpose in order to make Stephen look really bad and take away everything that took place with his wrongful conviction. He wanted to erase that it ever took place.
I also get the feeling that Buting is referring to the fact that cops did not do enough follow-up and enough interviewing of people for them to even have enough evidence for a Denny motion. Like, are they going to go out and actually investigate this on their own to provide Denny?
Agree. The only thing I have playing the devil's advocate to flip that is Jerry is forgetting that the timeline of events, as quickly as it started, it also ended very quickly back at the Avery salvage yard. So when he speaks about going back and doing interviews and stuff at the beginning, that would mean that they were having to have done that after the fact. There was no other finger that was being pointed at that stage but back at the salvage yard. So unless he's alluding to the point that it has to be someone on the salvage yard, it always keeps coming back to Stephen. So any outside influence of that, the RAB wasn't found anywhere else. And I say that because in the court of law, it was found at the salvage yard. So they had nowhere else. The investigation stopped the moment that RAB was found. Why would they go and do anything beyond that in terms of Denny when someone delivered Stephen Avery / the Avery salvage yard on a silver platter straight to them on the morning of the 5th?
100% correct. They had the guy they wanted, and they were delivered on a silver platter. There's no reason to do any more investigation when the circumstances are pointing right at the guy you'd like to arrest. 100% correct.
And I just wanted to say, and going back, because I know this episode now that Bobby Dassy has been introduced and he's on the stand, and it gets a lot of people passionate, and there's a lot of people that believe he did it, and there's a lot of people that think he didn't, and I think it's fair that you can have your own opinion. I just want to echo this out to the community when they listen to this. We're fighting a case here that is a man is wrongfully convicted of a crime he did not commit. We wouldn't be in this community if we felt otherwise. I think even if you think Bobby has done it, that's fair and I get it, but have respect, because at the end of the day, don't become a hypocrite. You can't accuse someone of doing something if you don't have the full answers and the real proof of evidence to convict him. What you would be doing is no different than what the state did to Stephen Avery. He has a right to presumption of innocence, whether he did it or not. On top of that, even if Bobby did do it, let's go down this, the more that we feed into this, if you want true, and I mean real true justice for Teresa, you have to be careful what you put out in the community, because I've been looking into a lot of cases lately where someone has been accused of doing something and they just can't exactly trial them, because at the end of the day, there's these nagging biasm into the community already. And if Bobby did it and he was ever going to be prosecuted, they would find it hard to prosecute him, because there is now not a jury out there that would give him a fair trial. So be very mindful what you say. Be very mindful who you accuse. If you are not an investigator, we are people that you do this for a passion, as a hobby, whatever motive it is that brings you into the case. We are not going to solve it. This is up to the jury, to Kathleen now, the lawyers, to figure it out. But at the end of the day, what Kathleen is doing is her job. It is not our job to take away Bobby or anyone in this case's presumption of innocence. I think that's really, really unfair. So I just want to echo that, because I know it's going to get a little bit hot in the comments as Bobby comes onto the screen and everyone's like, "You lying sack of shit, rah, rah, rah." Remember, presumption of innocence, he has an entitlement to it, and don't be a hypocrite. That is all.
That's a very good point. And we mustn't forget the forensic evidence points to Stephen Avery. Okay. It could be planted forensic evidence, but it only points to Stephen Avery at this stage. And as we've discussed many times, we've got to explain the blood in the RAV4. It's as simple as that, right? The RAV4 was the game changer, okay? There is no forensic evidence as far as we know that points to Bobby Dassy. But we also mustn't forget that there's no forensic evidence that points to Brendan Dassy either, right? So Brendan, unfortunately, he walked into the bear trap and he got arrested. You know, if he had kept quiet, he never would have come into the picture. I believe Bobby Dassy was looking after Bobby Dassy. He defended himself, he protected himself, but we need to have a look at that interview that he had on November the 9th. What transpired? Why they're still keeping it? You know, was he put under pressure? Is it either, you know, did the police put it to him? It's either you or your uncle. Who are you going to choose? So again, you're correct, Kelly. Everyone has that presumption of innocence, but it's rather ironical that Stephen wasn't given that advantage at the beginning. You know, they had to defend his guilt rather than defend his innocence. And that's truly devastating.
Well, it's a time to wrap. I have my closing comments are this, right? Even if you're not a fan of Stephen Avery, like Deb Strauss, and even if you think he's guilty, someday, somehow, the justice system might be pointed at you. It might be pointed at your kid, your brother, you know, someone that you really care about, and you have to ask yourself, if you condone the tactics that the state of Wisconsin used against Stephen Avery in this trial, would you want them to, or this whole investigation, would you want them to have a search warrant to allow them to search your house for anything they wanted for 8 days, right? That you're kicked out? Would you want them to, you know, to be able to deny the naming of somebody who's a potentially viable suspect for a kind of a flimsy reason, or do you think you should be allowed the ability to create the reasonable doubt? You know, it's very important that you look at, even if you think Stephen did it, very critical that you ask yourself, what kind of justice system do you want, and really fight, you know, and actively argue against the things that they did in this trial and this whole investigation that were absolutely wrong and corrupt. And if that means somebody guilty, you know, and you're like Stephen has to go, you know, has to get out, then that's what has to happen to be able to affect change, to get them to stop doing this, because someday you're going to be on the other end of that stick, whether it's you know, as an individual yourself or somebody that you care about. And it's that you have to protest as hard as you can for fundamental fairness. And that's my closing remark for this episode.
This was a really good episode so far. It's going to get really volatile now, and yeah, learnt a lot. I am still very disturbed by what Bobby Dassy said during the trial. I simply can't work it out, and it's terrible because Ken Kratz manipulated Bobby Dassy. And, you know, everyone is correct. Bobby Dassy felt very, very uncomfortable in that chair, and, you know, rightly so. Thank you.
Well, I think everybody summed it up really well. I'm actually looking forward to the next episode. I've got a little more input on that when they get into dealing with the phones and stuff. And I know Big Jeff too. I've picked his brain on some of it, so can't wait for the next episode.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else. I think my closing statement was the whole don't throw rocks at glass houses as a community. The truth is, I don't know who killed Teresa Hallbuck. So I don't ever sit here and try to put someone down with their theory to say you're wrong, because I don't know. Just like you don't know, because we don't know what happened. The only thing I'm confident in saying is I know who didn't kill Teresa, and that was Brendan and it was Stephen. And on top of that, everyone in the community that's doing the research and that are studying this case, keep going, because although we might not end up solving the case because it's now in the, like I said, the hands of the lawyers like Kathleen and Laura and all that, they're still feeding, like we're feeding them some great information, and we can make a difference. It's just that we're not going to be the ones that ultimately turn that lock and key. But everyone's doing great. Thank you for listening. But again, just be respectful to people's lives and to the people that are suffering still from this day. Stephen, Brendan, certain family members, friends, everyone, even Teresa's family, you know, they, whether, you know, there's so many conspiracies, whether they're involved or not, I don't tend to go that way. But at the end of the day, they still lost a loved one. Teresa's life still mattered. So yeah, thanks for having me, and I'll see you guys next week.
And we'll see everybody else next week too. Thanks for coming. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This has been Discussing a Murderer.